Hey, good evening, everybody. So I'm Curtis Walker. This is CK Live 76244, Keller, Texas. And tonight I thought to do something a little different. We have had some developments in society at large. In case you haven't watched the news, there has been the release from custody in Russia by President Putin of Brittany Griner. There was a conference today from the White House involving the spouse or partner. I don't necessarily know how to explain that, so I won't attempt to. President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. Also, there was the Twitter files that were released of late, and that has definitely been a sensitive and polarizing topic to say the least. Furthermore, there have been the cases that have been submitted, or I think are in the process of being submitted to the Supreme Court involving the covenant or practice of marriage. But I do know that the Respect for Marriage Act did pass in the House. So that is going to be signed at some point by the President of the United States, unless there is a veto, and that will become the law of the land by statute. And obviously, there's been some discussions, particularly from those people that have a religious faith, of how that will affect people, affect churches, their 501c status, which is important for religious organizations to be able to function, as well as to receive donations and to take part in some of the practices or activities in relation to that faith group. So there is a lot going on. Obviously, we just came out of the midterms, and now Reverend, I don't know exactly how I would say that, but either way, has become the senator elect of the state of Georgia. Herschel Walker, the candidate running against him, conceded and gave his concession speech. So that's interesting. Kari Lake, the candidate that was running for governor in the state of Arizona, is now submitting her case, and she has stated that she will go all the way to the Supreme Court if necessary. And Arizona, as well as Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, were all interesting states to follow during the election period. Finally, the counts rather have all been tabulated in all the states. So there has been some finalization of the 2022 midterms. It's interesting that we're not accustomed to things being the way they are, but there has been a statement that now society has been accustomed to the elections running the way that they are. We've had interesting candidates, whether that be in Pennsylvania or in Georgia, or perhaps again in Pennsylvania, where a deceased person was elected to office. That was interesting in itself. Senator Ted Kennedy gave a nice poetic speech or description of some things when he was campaigning for a candidate, Herschel Walker, where he said to get out and vote. If the dead people can, then so can you. So I thought that was hilarious and humorous. And Senator Ted Kennedy, as they say, he is a national treasure. So with all the things that are going on, I thought to create something from my own heart about today in comparison to the days that I grew up and how I think it relates. I hope that it's encouraging. I also hope that, that it is something that you find interesting at the least. I know that I do. I think about the days of my raising or growing up in the small neighborhood of Hempstead, Long Island, and now living all the way down here, as they say, in Fort Worth, Texas. It is definitely two different worlds, but nevertheless, suburbia is generally suburbia. So I'm very grateful in that aspect. And it has been a journey and continues to be a journey. But in reflection, I thought about society, and ESPN is going off. So there is that. I don't necessarily know why ESPN is going off on my phone, but it is. And that's okay. That's fine. So I just think that, there's a lot going on in the world. I don't know how you feel about all the things that are going on in the world from your own perspective. I read the news and, I was turning my phone off. I read the news, and as well, I look at Twitter. Twitter's instantaneous news is also entertainment. I know the state of Texas and the state of South Dakota have, what's the word that I'm looking for? I don't know if that's read into statute, but they basically said that if you wanted to use TikTok and any government phones or government facilities, that is no longer possible. So they banned that in Florida. Excuse me, in Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis, if I remember the news right, he was saying that, or they had a conference about COVID has been an ongoing situation in our country for the last 2 years, feels like even longer, where people, I'm trying to be, no, I'm not going to be politically correct. People literally have just had enough of it. I know that when I was living in North Carolina and even here in Texas, you don't hear about that anymore. And there are obvious reasons, from the multiple practices or application of mask, don't mask, wear multiple masks, or vaccines work to vaccines don't work to we always knew that vaccines don't work, and then to all of the quote unquote health problems, from myocarditis to people dying to complications in pregnancy. And obviously, when the studies were released, to find out there were actually never any studies to see if COVID actually had any efficacy, or excuse me, the vaccines actually had any efficacy against COVID. That was interesting to find out, that you were applying a vaccine and stating that it was EUA, and then that it was mandated, and then it's not mandated, and then it's pandemic, and then it's not pandemic, and you know there's a lot of things in the wash. And so, from society's perspective, in many places all over the country, and not just here, in other countries, there has been some rejection and distrust from the media as well as the government. I think if we're going to be honest, then we would say that that would be justified, considering the things that were done during the quote unquote COVID stage of our history, the things that were said about people. Excuse me. We've had the winter of death, which never happened, needless to say. And again, just making all of the different statements in comparison to other things, the absolutely eradication of the flu, which just disappeared off the face of the earth, according to people. But you understand what I'm saying. I'm being facetious. And the multiple statements out of the CDC, the multiple statements out of different governments. And then look where we are now as far as COVID-related conversation. So you can understand how there's definitely been some public abuse, and there's some distrust, and there are definitely some feelings of regret for some people, and then some feelings of justification for others. So the past 2 years have definitely been interesting, to say the least. I think that as a believer, and I make no reservations about believing that Jesus is God, that He is Savior, and that He's Lord, and that He is coming back for His church. I don't think that I have to defend that. I think that you're entitled to believe what you want to believe, but I happen to believe that, and so I'm going to stand on that. Nevertheless, for believers as well as non-believers, you could see how there's definitely been some commonalities that would give people the rise to say, hey, wait a minute, let's take a step back and think about everything that's going on. So if I were a newscaster, and I'm not, and I were going to talk about society, I would start a little bit like this. So I would say, what does society look like? And if I ask myself that question in comparison to how things were when I was growing up, and there is a clear difference, sometimes you have to wonder, how did it all change so rapidly? And if I were to reflect, it was not so long ago when I remember seeing every kid on my block playing outside until dark and beyond. The sheer joy of being with your friends was liberating freedom. And as long as there was sunlight, there was always something to inspire your activity or the happenstance of just being young. Presently, I live in a neighborhood where you will see kids playing outdoors, but not for hours on end. Of course, we all have cell phones, computers, iPads, and every social media platform that you can think of, and it is all right at your fingertip. Long gone are the days of mounting your bicycle and setting off for an all-day adventure with no clear idea of where you were going. And as long as your friends rode along, it never really mattered. Maybe a museum, a beach, another neighborhood, a ride across town to a different playground, or just a bike chase through as many streets as there were turns, and all just for the fun of it. I know this might sound funny, but we actually had to remember phone numbers. Whereas now, if someone knows a phone number by memory, it is a minor miracle. Even I have to look at my electronic devices to find the number sometimes. Whereas in the past, I knew the number of my friends, my mom's job, my house, and so forth and so on. Now that is just a little descriptive thought of the change in society and reveals that something has happened. Are we different, or have we been programmed or even reprogrammed differently? The elections have just happened for the midterms, and I was reading how, according to a tweet, that the public has been conditioned to accept fraud. I don't necessarily know that that is true in totality, but there is a feeling of powerlessness when it comes to politics, and now elections. And what does politics and elections have to do with the relation to our youth? Well, it seems I propose that is directly related to all things. It just happens to be an indication of the freedoms that we hold dear, and if we are not careful to protect them, like society, things will slip away until it is unnoticeable that it has even transpired. If you pause and reflect on your youth, there is one thing that correlates to most citizens in this country. Perchance, you were raised in Nebraska and saw beautiful sunsets, or Malibu and enjoyed the evening breezes along the western shores, or you hiked through the Appalachian Mountains, or perhaps you loved the hot evenings walking in the midst of the Big Apple. Whatever sights, sounds, and smells fill your heart with warm memories or sad ones, the common bond, no matter the circumstance, is a simple word: freedom. America has always been a bastion of freedom in the world, from the isolated destinations to the most crowded cities in Europe or Eastern Europe, which have been enamored with this place of freedom, so much so that people dare to dream about the possibility of touching its ideal shores. Imagine being from a world where your every moment was captured, your thoughts were regulated, your impulses and desires were restricted, your passion curtailed, and your physical ability or capability to be whatever or wherever you willed to go was no longer reality. As Americans, that would be cruel and unusual punishment, because our culture has always been based upon the individual will and response to innate reasoning that it is our God-given right to be free. Most of us living in the 21st century have never had to endure what citizens who immigrate to our country experience, and are horrified by the basic lack of civil rights and inhumane treatment when we hear the stories of people who dwell in other parts of the world. Because we have this notion of space, right, and volition, it is the commonality of and outcome of our youthful days. There is no sign printed with the words along the vast highway systems of the country. There are no elementary classes that instruct us as adolescents. Our parents don't set aside time, quote unquote, for have the right to be or say or do sit downs in our homes. No one has to tell us that this is how life is supposed to be. Yet somehow, from the inner city youth to the teen in Beverly Hills to the farmer kid in Texas, we all know it to be true. That is culture. That may be simplistic to say it in that fashion, but in reality, maybe it is the simplicity of our society that is under attack. It is the concept of freedom that is entangled in a war of will with the common American citizen, the crowning prize and achievement. This brings us back to politics. That word, along with religion, and now preferences, that has made our society so divisive and seemingly more abusive today. The innocence of days past shall not return if we allow the forces that be in the political arena, social arena, economic arena, entertainment arena, and mass media to dictate what we should accept or how we should accept in our daily lives. I would state in ending, your world and neighborhood is worth standing up for. Your committal is based upon the reality that your future and present are directly related to your decision. What the powers that be, whatever they may call themselves, really desires your compliance, but more so, your indifference. You see, indifference is the slope of decadence and has always been the catalyst for gradual decline. Decline has never been the medicine of immediacy, but it is a long con game of attrition. It is patient and oftentimes seemingly harmless, but like the snake that charms its prey, there is little doubt to the end result. It is my prayer that our country realizes its condition, realizes the trap that has been sprung, wakes to its reality, and like the mongoose, turns its head and quickly dispatches the enemy that has surrounded our schools, neighborhoods, cities, governments, institutions, and has infused itself into every facet of our society. But all is not lost. In the immortal words of someone famous, all it takes for envy or evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. And all that is needed to be quite simple is something we learned from our youngest days. If something is rotten, don't eat it. And don't let your friend eat it either. Experience has led me to believe that there will always be more people who refrain from something that they know is poison than there will be who take it. That is my take on society and the responsibility to guard our freedoms, because freedom is worth guarding. So that is my take, and I hope that it's encouraging. I hope that it's interesting and possibly stimulating to the thought. And have a great night, everyone.